That's Enough Out of You, a weekly podcast where you'll hear the truth, or at least a closer version of the truth than most of the bullshit that's out there. Here are your hosts, Bill Rader and Sean Kane.
Welcome to That's Enough Out of You. I'm your host, Bill Rader.
And I'm Sean Kane.
And this is a weekly podcast where we talk about a lot of different things. We talk about sports and history and sports history. We talk about current events. We talk about pop culture, true crime, all kinds of stuff.
We talk about whatever we want because it's our show, Billy.
It's our show, Sean. And this week we are going to continue with our series, our November series for honoring and remembering the assassination of one of our great presidents, John F. Kennedy. And the episode that we did last week, Sean, we focused, or you focused really, on Lee Harvey Oswald and what is known as the 201, or the Oswald 201 file.
Right.
And that that episode, to me, I know some of the subject matter was a little bit confusing, and probably confusing to our listeners. I know it was to me, but I think it's intentionally confusing, right? I mean,
well, that's a great point, Bill. I mean, it is intentionally confusing because you got to realize that these operations by these intelligence officers these people are so smart. Like when you look at like Alan Dulles, these guys are all Ivy League grads. Like Alan Dulles was a Princeton guy. Richard Helms, who would take over as director, he's a Brown guy. James Angleton that we talked about, he has a Harvard degree from Harvard, and he's got a law degree from Yale.
right.
So these are very intelligent people. So yes, it is confusing by design, and that's a great point.
And when you think about it, I mean, the simplest part of the assassination was the fact that the president of the United States was murdered in broad daylight, in full view of thousands of people. Well, Bill,
I take you back to that song I mentioned in the first episode. We talked about JFK, the Bob Dylan song. There's another great line in there where he says, thousands were watching, but no one saw a thing.
Right.
And he called it the greatest magic trick ever pulled.
Yeah. And, you just relate that to today. Like, could you imagine? I mean, obviously it's not going to happen today, but if it did happen today, if the president of the United States,
it's amazing,
any public figure, any politician or, important public figure, if anything happens to anybody, literally, I mean, the Kardashians, if anything happens to a Kardashian, on the street, there's 20 people with their cameras right there.
Exactly.
And then we've got, there's, every single speck of the crime scene would be preserved and tested. And, we would know with beyond a shadow of a doubt who was there and who did what. And here we are, 50 years later, 50 some years later, and we still don't know for sure, who did it. It's just, it's amazing. It's unbelievable.
Well, you got to remember, Bill, there's thousands of documents that they had on Oswald. I mean, this wasn't just, it's 201 file. There's thousands of pages of documents, that are still, not to this day, that are still classified.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we all know, you could declassify a document just by thinking about it. Right.
Yeah.
All right. We won't get into that.
We won't get into that. No.
But we will get into the topic today. We're going to continue the topic of Lee Harvey Oswald. So Sean, I'll hand it over to you, let you get going.
Well, let's start, Bill, with a little bit of the evidence against Oswald. Okay. So we know what happened November 22nd, 1963. President shot. Lee Harvey Oswald is arrested. And then he's shot and killed by a nightclub owner named Jack Ruby. Now, the evidence against Oswald, Bill, there's so many pieces of evidence that I could point to just say this is garbage. I mean, just the chain of custody on this stuff wouldn't
Right.
stand up in court. You know what I
Right.
mean? But
Yep.
let's just throw out a couple pieces of evidence. The one thing to me this is game over is the FBI did what's called paraffin tests, nitrate tests. Okay. And they did, they're looking for residue on Oswald. Okay. Now he had a positive trace, very, very low amounts on his hand, but on the palm of his hand, not on the outside of the hand,
Mhm.
which you would, expect if you fired a rifle. But the concentration was so low, it's consistent with, say, handling cardboard boxes, which makes sense because he worked at a school book depository where he was
Right.
stacking boxes.
Right.
But here's the key, Bill. The residue on his cheek and on his face and on his neck, okay, was negative. Okay, negative. There is no way you could fire that Mannlicher Carcano rifle and get a negative test. The only way to get a negative test is not fire a rifle.
Right.
And the FBI did dozens and dozens of tests to try to duplicate that, and they couldn't do it. They got a positive test with heavy trace amounts
Mhm.
all over the face and the cheek. I mean, so right there, to me, that's game over. It's
Right.
game over. Oswald didn't fire a rifle that day. Okay. So then another piece of evidence is they can't even put him on the 6th floor, Bill.
Yeah.
Okay. The Warren Commission said that he fired 3 shots from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. The first one missed, and then 2 hits. Okay. Now, then he wipes the rifle clean, stashes it on the other side of the building, and then runs down the stairs. And this is important, Bill, because remember, this is 1963. The
Mhm.
building had wooden elevators. So the elevator was at the top floor. So it never made it down to the bottom. So it wasn't even an option. The Warren Commission didn't even use it as an option. That elevator never moved because it takes forever for that. They probably had like a hamster and a little thing rolling around to get that.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And then the stairwell, Bill, is so small in that building. I mean, there's no way you can have multiple people in the stairwell running down the steps and, first of all, not hear anything because there's wooden steps.
Right.
And second of all, not see somebody run past you. There's not enough room in the stairwell. And the other thing is, Bill, is when you come down in that building, you would come out on one floor. You would have to actually like open a door and go to like the next floor and then into another door. You know what I mean? It wasn't all like stairwell wasn't all encased. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Right.
So it was like really, really impossible for Oswald to be in the 6th floor. And here's why, Bill. There's witnesses. One of them was a girl by the name of Vicki Adams. Now, a researcher by the name of Barry Ernest wrote a tremendous book called Girl on the Stairs. And he did tremendous research with this, and he needs to be given a lot of credit for this. But he read the testimony and he reached out to Sandra Stiles because Sandra Stiles said Vicki Adams and her co-worker, Sandra Stiles, were on the 4th floor. Okay. When Oswald fired the shots, their testimony says within 10 seconds, they left and they went down the stairwell
Hmm.
to go outside.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if Oswald is stashing that rifle on the other side and then running back out the stairwell, because there's only one stairwell, Bill, he's running down, there's no way the girls wouldn't have seen him.
Right.
But their testimony, they both said they never seen him. So what the Warren Commission did is they tried to say that they had the timeline wrong, that they that it must have been a minute, 2 minutes after, and Oswald had time. Because here's the other problem. There was a cop by the name of Marion Baker, and he was in the parade route. And when the shots went off, Bill, he saw pigeons going off the top of the buildings. So he said, I'm going to go to the building that's closest to me, which was the school book depository, not because he thought shots came from there, but because he thought if he got to the roof, he would have a great view of the assassin running away. And everybody was running towards the grassy knoll because that's where everybody thought the shots came from. So this police officer wanted to get to the roof and see if he could see the assassin running away from the knoll. So he runs in and he goes to the second floor, and he sees in the second floor, there's a snack room there. And he sees a supervisor by the name of Roy Truly. And he's with another employee. And he says, "Do you know this man?" And he says, "Yes, he's an employee. His name's Lee Harvey Oswald." And he lets him go, and he runs up the stairs because, again, he couldn't take the elevator. The elevator's at the top. So he runs up the stairs, and he never, he's seen Oswald on the second floor. So his testimony is he was right outside the school book depository. So he's saying within like a minute at the most, he's running inside that building. Okay. So that's a big problem for the Warren Commission. So what they do is they discredit the two girls, Stiles and Adams. But here's the problem, Bill. This guy, Barry Ernest, did such a great job researching. He found other witnesses. He found a witness by the name of Dorothy Gardner, who was the two girls, Stiles and Adams, was her supervisor. Okay. And she's not in the 26 volumes of the Warren Report. But when he talked to Adams, she told him to reach out to Gardner. So he found her, he tracked her down, and he interviewed her, and she said that she was interviewed by the Warren Commission. But where's her testimony, Bill? And here's the explosive thing, what Gardner had to say. So Gardner's on the fourth floor with the girls. She's the supervisor. And she said the girls, 10 seconds after the shooting, like the girl said, they went down the stairs. Now Gardner went out into the stairwell, okay, to like keep the other workers on the floor there. And she was in the stairwell the entire time until the police officer, Marion Baker, comes running up, trying to get to the roof and questions her. So this is explosive. This is explosive because now you have her backing up the girls, but not only that, she's in the stairwell. So there's no way for Oswald to get down from the sixth floor.
Right.
Okay. And here's what happened. Barry Ernest went to the archives and he looked, because everything is transcribed, and he looked for the date of when Gardner was supposed to give this testimony, and the girls give testimony that day too. And he found the date, and what it said there was no notes from that day. And he found the file that said it was marked secret. It was declassified, and it said information sent to the Warren Commission for destruction. Now think about how explosive that is, Bill.
Yeah.
The Warren Commission knew that Gardner's testimony could never get in those volumes, because with her, you can't put Oswald on the sixth floor.
Right.
And this is the problem I have with the Warren Commission. It's just a fairy tale.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
So, Sean, two things for me right off the bat. Number one, Oswald wasn't stupid.
No, I don't think he was.
So here's a guy who he allegedly just murdered the president of the United States.
Right.
Packed up the rifle that he did it with, walks down 4 flights of stairs and sits in the snack room.
Right. And he bought a Coke too.
So now he realizes it, because he's got a brain, and he just shot the president from this building.
Right.
That they're going to eventually come into that building and question everybody in that building. Right?
You would think, yeah.
So what is he doing sitting in the break room?
Exactly. I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all, Bill. It doesn't make any sense at all. You know,
the other thing is, he would have had to, I mean, from the physical evidence, from the eyewitness evidence, he would have had to like teleport somehow from the 6th floor to the 2nd floor.
They can't put him on the floor, Bill.
Right.
They can't put him on the floor. The Warren Commission had one witness, Bill, that said they seen him, and remember, he's in a sniper position, Bill. So he's kneeling down from the window, and the witness was on the thing, and he identified Oswald like height and weight. Like, how could you tell a guy when he's kneeling down in a window, see anything about him? But yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yep.
It's ridiculous. But one of the most, do you have any more to add, Bill, or could I go on?
Well, no, that's it. Those are my 2 things for now, Sean. I'm sure I'll think of things.
Well, one of the most ridiculous things, Bill, is the magic bullet. the magic bullet is just, and everybody's seen that Seinfeld episode where, the bullets going all over and just,
Right. The magic
it's just,
loogie.
yeah, it's, I mean, but let's just look at this, Bill. The bullet that supposedly went through two people, went through a bunch of bones, and it ends up almost pristine on a stretcher. It wasn't even the right stretcher. Okay. And here's the problem. The Warren Commission, their own witness, or their own expert, I should say, their own expert witness was a man by the name of Dolce, who was a field medic during the war, Bill, during 2 wars. And they gave him 100 bullets in a Mannlicher Carcano rifle to fire into the wrists of human cadavers. Okay. And
Yeah.
every single bullet, Bill, the bullet was smashed.
Yeah.
And Dolce said, listen, that bullet is no way is that bullet in evidence, the bullet that you're saying did these things and went through two people. It's not possible. And anybody who's a hunter, Bill, that pulled bullets out of deers, they'll tell you bullets get smashed when they hit bone, when they hit trees, when they hit, when they go into deer. I mean, that bullet looks like a bullet that was test fired in a tank of water. There's like a little slit on the top. It's almost pristine.
Right.
So it's absolutely ridiculous, and the last piece of evidence, Bill, if we haven't convinced anybody yet that the evidence against Oswald is complete garbage, all you have to do is say the name Carlos Hathcock. Are you familiar with that name?
No.
Okay. Carlos Hathcock is definitely the best. He was the best sniper during the Vietnam era. And he might be one of the best snipers in human history, Bill. This guy was so deadly with a rifle. I mean, the Viet Cong actually put a contract on him because he was so,
Wow.
yeah, he has over, I don't know how many confirmed kills he had in Vietnam, but he had at one time, he had the longest shot, was like 1.5 miles. And the thing is, Bill, when he retired from the military, he set up a training school for snipers, and police departments from all over the world would send their SWAT units to train with Carlos Hathcock because he was that effective. He was unbelievable. And the thing is, he tried to recreate what the Warren Commission said.
Yeah.
And he couldn't do it. And he said, "You're telling me that kid did the shooting?" He said, "Come on."
Yeah.
Listen, if I was a lawyer, I would just call Carlos Hathcock to the stand.
Right.
You know what I mean? If that doesn't convince you, I don't know what else would.
Well, here's I mean, that's the thing though. This never got to trial.
No, it didn't, thanks to Ruby.
Right. And Ruby, who claimed to be a great patriot.
Yeah, he was sparing Jackie Kennedy from having to testify at the trial.
Right.
Oh my God.
Yep.
But and then anybody who ever seen the Zapruder film, Bill, knows that Kennedy goes back into the left, so he's hit from the front. If you shoot somebody in the back of the head, it's like, Bill, if I punched you in the face, are you going to come forward at me, or are you going to go backwards?
Right.
I mean, you know what I mean? It's simple physics. And then one last piece of evidence: a forensic pathologist will tell you that the particles of a bullet, when it fragments, the bigger the particle, the larger particles always go to the exit wound because they travel the most because they have mass.
Mm-hmm.
The smaller particles will stay in the entrance wound. Okay. Now, that's what you find with Kennedy. The right front temple is where the smaller particles are, and the back is where the larger ones are. And now with the declassified documents, there's over 40 some witnesses, Bill, medical personnel that was at Parkland in Dallas and Bethesda, where they did the autopsy, who said that the back of Kennedy's head was blowing out.
Yeah.
The exit wound was massive in the back.
I mean, we know that. Yeah, we see, the Zapruder film shows Jackie climbing to the back of the limousine to pick up the chunk of the back of his head.
Exactly. So, and last thing, the great writer Stephen King, who a fellow Boston Red Sox fan who I love, but again, he's a fiction writer, great fiction writer, capital F. He said in an interview one time, he said, "Follow the evidence. And if you follow the evidence, it'll lead to Oswald." Well, sorry, Stephen, I followed the evidence. It certainly doesn't lead to Oswald.
Yeah. I mean, if anything, I don't think there's any question at this point that Oswald didn't do the shooting. I think the question is, did Oswald know I mean, he must have known something was going to happen because he was in that building. He knew Kennedy was going, that the motorcade was going by there. So whether he was set up to be a patsy or whatever the case may be.
Well, Bill, if you go on the premise that he's an intelligence officer, working for the intelligence community, he's under orders. So he could have been told anything.
Right.
He could have been told that they were going to simulate an attack. I'm just making this up now, but he could have been told that they were simulating an attack on Kennedy to blame it on Cuba. They could have been told anything, Bill.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what he's told because he's under orders. You understand?
Right. Right.
And that's where I want to go next. I want to go because when you look at Oswald, Bill, okay, every time I'm reading about Oswald, I think back to a movie. I don't know if you've seen the movie The Recruit with Al Pacino and Bridget Moynihan from Blue Bloods.
Maybe saw it, a long time ago. I can't remember.
Well, they're in it with Colin Farrell's in it too. And Colin Farrell and Bridget Moynihan are young recruits, and Al Pacino's training them as a CIA training officer. And one of the things he says to them, he says, remember, nothing is as it seems. And that's what I look at Oswald, like nothing is what it seems. Like when you look at him, he's supposed to be this communist, okay? And on the surface, he's doing all these things pro-Castro, pro-Khrushchev, he's defecting to the Soviet Union. But then when you really take a hardcore look at him, he's friends with people who are all the way to the right, not to the left, okay? And that are associated with the CIA actually trying to kill Fidel Castro. So that's where I say, is he a real communist or is he an agent provocateur, a double agent?
Yeah.
So let's get into some of that. So the first thing is when I say he was a false defector, okay, there's a lot of evidence, Bill, to suggest that Oswald wasn't a true defector, okay? And one of the biggest things is there was a guy at the State Department by the name of Otto Opekta, okay? And what he was doing is he was investigating, because what he's seen an uptick of Americans defecting to the Soviet Union, because in like 1 year, in like an 8-year span, there was only like a handful of guys, a handful of people that defected. But then in 1 year, there was like 7 or 8. So he saw an uptick, and he heard rumors that the CIA and Navy intelligence were running this false defector program. And what he wanted to do is he wanted to see which one of these people were the false defectors and which ones were true defectors, so he could keep an eye on the true ones from the State Department and let the CIA and Navy intel handle their own people. And when he got to the name Oswald, his entire life got turned upside down. First of all, James Angleton, who I said earlier, was controlling Oswald's files at the CIA. He directed all his people to tell Opekta nothing, give him nothing on Oswald, absolutely nothing. And then Opekta's life gets turned upside down. He becomes involved in an investigation against him. They said that he was stealing documents. His safe got broken into. I believe he ended up getting fired. I think there was trumped up charges against him. So, there's Angleton protecting that name Oswald, protecting an asset, and another interesting thing, the day Oswald's arrested, he tried to make a phone call, okay, from the jail to a guy by the name of John Hurt. Now this is standard spycraft. He gave 2 names with the same name, John, and I forget the middle name, Hurt, and 2 different addresses, okay? The one John Hurt turned out to be a retired military intelligence analyst, and he was stationed at Nags Head, North Carolina, which is right where this false defector program was being worked out of. So I don't think there's so much other information. I just think there's no doubt that Oswald, he's not a true defector. This is why he was allowed to come back in the United States.
Yeah.
Okay. Because think about other defectors that when they went to Russia, how much trouble they had getting back into the States.
Right.
But here's Oswald. The State Department gave him money to travel.
It makes no sense. It's,
And then he had a Russian wife, Bill. He brings a Russian wife back who her family had ties, like loose ties, but ties to the KGB. And she just comes right back in the country, and he comes right back in the country with her, and nothing, no problem whatsoever.
Yeah. And I can't who would defect? I mean, you hear all the time about, people, during that time and even now to a certain extent, defecting from the Soviet Union to the United States. Of course, now it's Russia, but
he's going from here to there.
It makes makes absolutely no sense.
No, it doesn't, Bill.
Yeah, I mean, and then, like you said, coming almost waltzing back into the country with no problems whatsoever. You would think that this is, if somebody defected to the Soviet Union, they would at least have held him for questioning and, making sure he wasn't a spy. And I mean, you would think, right? But obviously,
but here's another interesting thing that came out, Bill, through the Assassination Record Review Board, which was created because of the movie JFK, and a person that was on there by the name of Doug Horn investigated this, and he concluded that the final quarter of Oswald's military service, he wasn't getting paid by the Marine Corps, and that's a fact. So that final quarter, he's still in the Marines, and then he defects. He gets a discharge and he defects. Who's paying him? He's got money coming in, but it's not coming from the Marine Corps.
Yeah. Well, his I'm sure his hefty salary from his job at the book depository.
What this is before that, though. He's not even. This is when he's still in the Marines.
Yeah.
But then Bill, he goes to Dallas, okay, and he's down in Dallas, and this is where he befriends the guy that we mentioned before, George de Mohrenschildt, becomes his best friend, and he's down there in Dallas. He's recruiting other communists. He's in colleges down there trying to recruit people to the Communist Party, which he's not even a part of. But George de Mohrenschildt, I mean, Jim Garrison, when he did his investigation into the Kennedy assassination in New Orleans, he said, how in the world does someone like de Mohrenschildt and Oswald even meet? Because de Mohrenschildt comes from this rich family. He's an oil geologist. And I mentioned before, Bill, he has a connection to Allen Dulles, because when George was 10 years old, a young lawyer from Sullivan and Cromwell law firm representing Rockefeller oil interest went to see de Mohrenschildt's father to broker an oil deal. And that's where the relationship between de Mohrenschildt and Dulles began. And it would continue. And de Mohrenschildt would become an asset for the CIA. Okay. And de Mohrenschildt was also a white Russian. Now, the white Russians, Bill, okay, hated the communists because the communists were taking all their money. So why in the world would the white Russian community take Oswald in? It's just bizarre. And now we know from the declassified files that it was J. Walton Moore, the section chief of the CIA in Dallas, that asked de Mohrenschildt to reach out and take a look at this guy Oswald. So in fact, he's directed de Mohrenschildt to become his handler. Okay.
Yeah.
And then what happens is de Mohrenschildt ends up being directed by the CIA to go to Haiti next. And I don't want to get into that down that rabbit hole. But when he goes to Haiti, he passes Oswald off to Ruth and Michael Paine. Now, Ruth and Michael Paine, Bill, again, it goes back to that movie, Bill. Nothing is what it seems. These two seem like they're this ACLU, Quaker, pacifist, peace-loving couple, living there in plain sight. But they have such connections to, well, let's just put it this way. Ruth Paine, okay, her babysitter and lifelong friend was a person by the name of Mary Bancroft. Now, Mary Bancroft is the daughter of Hugh Bancroft, who was a Rockefeller banker, okay? And she was also the mistress of Allen Dulles. And more importantly than that, she was an asset of Dulles, an intelligence asset, because she was like this international art dealer, okay? And she would go all over the world, and Dulles would use her to get information. And Ruth Paine's sister was in the CIA. She was a psychologist recruited from the Air Force, and she was on the CIA payroll. Okay, and she's the one, Bill. Ruth Paine is the one who gets Oswald a job at the Texas School Book Depository. Yeah, and now her husband, Michael Paine, okay, who's this peace-loving pacifist, right? Well, his stepfather invented the Bell helicopter, okay, and he worked at Bell Helicopter with security clearance. So I don't know what kind of peace-loving pacifist works at a defense contractor.
Mm.
Okay. And his boss there was a guy by the name of Walter Dornberg. Okay. Walter Dornberg was a Nazi war criminal, Bill, who was rescued at the Nuremberg trials by Allen Dulles and brought over and given the job here because he was a scientist. He was given a job at Bell Helicopter. Okay. And his family, Michael Payne's family is very powerful. Two sides, the Forbes and then the Cabot Lodge family, which they're rivals. If you know anything about Boston, they're rivals of the Kennedys. Okay. And his cousin, actually, Thomas Paine or Thomas Cabot, is on the board of United Fruit. Now, the United Fruit Company was a Rockefeller company, and Allen Dulles was a stockholder in that with his brother. And they were involved with the coup in Guatemala when they overthrew Arbenz, and United Fruit Company took over that country, basically. So you see, Bill, the Paynes are sitting there, and Jim Garrison did a great investigation into the Paynes, and he found that they had file cabinets that they were keeping of records of people that were suspected communists. So these people are not ACLU Quaker pacifists. They're really domestic intelligence officers.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So then where does Oswald go? He goes to New Orleans. Okay. And this is where I mentioned he opened up the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, okay, which is a pro-Castro group. But the problem is, and Jim Garrison did a great job, Jim Garrison found that one of the flyers that Oswald was passing out this communist literature had the address of 544 Camp Street, okay? 544 Camp Street was the office of Guy Bannister. Guy Bannister was running the anti-Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Guy Bannister was training anti-Castro Cubans at a camp up in Lake Pontchartrain. Okay, he was involved in training Cubans for the Bay of Pigs operation, Bill. And Bannister, working out of an office that was being run by David Atlee Phillips of the CIA. And this is where Jim Garrison found us in right in the heart of the intelligence community in New Orleans. Here's Oswald passing out communist literature, and the guy who Oswald or that Garrison would suspect in the assassination and eventually arrest, Clay Shaw, his office was right down the street. So it's kind of like a bad play, Bill. Here's Oswald. He's right in the middle. He's passing on communist literature, and right in the heart of where these people are having they're having the war with Fidel Castro. You understand what I'm saying? It makes no sense.
Right.
Garrison understood this. So where do you want to go from here, Billy?
So from
You have
here,
any questions?
well, a couple of things come to mind. Okay. And number one, the immediate aftermath of this, obviously Oswald gets killed. He's essentially a lamb to slaughter. I mean, they parade him out into a crowded garage,
Right.
with obviously, minimal security, because Jack Ruby walked right in with a gun, walked right up to him and shot. I mean, there was obviously no security to protect him, even though this is a guy who just, he's arguably at that point the most famous criminal in the history of the country.
Exactly.
Next to, John Wilkes Booth and Billy the Kid. And yet there was no security around him. And then, essentially the campaign, what was it? The Time magazine cover showing him, which was clearly, as we know today, a photoshopped picture of him holding the rifle, which essentially in the minds of the average, American citizen at that point convicted him, right? You see him you see him standing there holding a rifle.
And he always said that photograph was a fake.
Yeah.
But getting back to Ruby, Bill, I mean, Ruby had such access to the Dallas Police Department. I mean, he shoots Oswald right in front of like 70 cops in that building. But he was like one of the cops. He was in and out. He had tremendous connections to the police department.
Yeah.
So you have to look at it like there's no way I think that anybody could believe that Ruby was part of the original conspiracy plan. He had to be a contingency plan.
Right.
Something happened where I believe Oswald should have been killed. That was going to be the plan. And Oswald escaped, and he's still alive, and he's in custody. So now what do you have to do? Well, you're going to send in the guy who has the most access to the police department. That's Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby,
Mhm.
you know, he was coming and going in the police all the time. He had friends. They would go to his carousel club. I mean, it was like nothing for him to go to a police station. So he was the perfect guy to send in there to do that. But so what other questions you got, Billy?
So here's and you I don't think you're gonna be able to answer this, Sean. This for so many years, and I go back to my father, and and I remember this very distinctly. I mean, all my entire childhood growing up, every time I would ask him about the JFK assassination, he would say, he would tell me, it was this guy, this nut who didn't like him, and so I guess, Sean, for so many people for so many years believing, and it was ingrained in
It was
people
ingrained in him.
that it was this one lone nut.
Sure, because that's all you hear in the media, Bill, and historians too. That's all you hear, history class.
Right.
But if you, I'll give you a quote by Richard Schweiker, was a Republican senator who was on the Church Committee with Democrat Frank Church, and they did a tremendous job investigating the CIA. And he said, when you look at Oswald, he has the fingerprints of intelligence all over him.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, nothing is what it seems. He's like and if you go back to his childhood, he was always fascinated with spies and watching spy shows, and he was tailor-made for people like Dulles and Angleton and Phillips and guys like that.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, Bill, a lot of people don't realize that there was prior plots to kill Kennedy. There was a plot in Chicago. There was a plot in Tampa. We now know that there was other plots. But if you look at what would have been the patsy in the Chicago plot, was a guy by the name of Thomas Arthur Valet. And in the Tampa plot was a Cuban-American by the name of Gilberto Lopez. And if you look at those two guys and you put their resume up with Oswald, it's almost identical. And the plots were similar too. So it's almost like there's no way this could be a coincidence, Yeah.
Sean, the only reasonable explanation that I can think of, because clearly Oswald was not, if they were going to use him as the patsy, if they were going to say, hey, it was this guy who was in the book depository and we got him, we killed him, we found him and we killed him.
Right.
That's one thing. But him, him living, and then, the obviously that the only real, the only thing that we have from him after he was arrested is that reporter asking him, did you kill the president of the United States? And he said, no, I'm innocent of these charges. I'm a patsy.
He said, yeah, fanatically deny these charges. I'm just a patsy. But Bill, if you remember that interview, he says to somebody says to him, you've been charged with killing the president. And he says something like, no, I haven't been charged with that. I've been charged with killing a police officer. And then somebody says behind him, says to him, no, you have been charged with killing the president. And if you look at the look in Oswald's face, it's like, that look speaks 1,000 words. Like, it's almost like he's saying, like, man, they got me good.
Yeah.
At that point, it's almost like he realizes, like, man, was I set up?
Well, and I think it probably all came together, for him, unfortunately for him at that time, that this is it. This is what, I've been set up to do, to take the fall for this.
Right.
So my question is, because they had to know he was not mentally the strongest person, he was not going to remain silent. He was not going to, take the fall like a man or whatever, why would they have chosen him? That's my question.
Well, Bill, the thing is, because I think he's the perfect guy, because he's already been used. He's already been sheep dipped as a communist. So the entire plot is to blame this. Remember, from the conspirators, they want to blame this on the Cubans and the Russians. Okay. And Oswald is already sheep dipped as a communist. So he's perfect to take this fall. And he's outlived his usefulness for the intelligence community. You know, he's starting to become a problem. They could get rid of him. And the thing is, I think when I go back to that phone call, okay, that he made from the jail cell, there was a CIA, a retired CIA chief by the name of Victor Marchetti. And Victor Marchetti said that that phone call sealed his fate, because that's when his handlers realized that he's not going to stay silent. He's not going to stay silent. So we have to take him out.
Yeah.
And that's when Ruby sent in. So the thing is, Bill, we don't know what Oswald actually knew of the in and outs of the actual plan. You know what I'm saying? Like,
right.
I think he was set up so perfectly. I think he's the perfect guy for this operation.
But what if Ruby either didn't get to him or if he survived, if Oswald survived that gunshot? That was their one chance. They weren't going to get another shot to kill him, or at least not publicly. So let's say, he survives the gunshot and they're able to go to trial, and he tests, his defense is all of these things that we have learned in the last, 50, 60 years. What then?
Well, that's impossible to answer. Like, what? I'm sure there was a contingency plan, but think about this, Bill. I mean, how did they discredit Ruby? Because Ruby goes to trial, right? And Ruby goes to jail, and then he's visited by a doctor by the name of Jolyon West. Okay, Jolyon West worked for Sidney Gottlieb, who ran the MK Ultra mind control program for the CIA. And when he visits Ruby is crazy after that visit. Like, he's curled up in a ball in the jail cell, and he's saying that they were murdering Jews in the next Saul, and he was paranoid. And so whatever West did to him, he did something there, and Ruby was totally discredited after that, because Ruby said, remember, Ruby wanted to be taken to Washington to testify. He said, another form of government is going to take over this country. Right. I want to tell my story, and then I want to leave the world. That's what Ruby said. Yeah. So Ruby was discredited. So there's always ways you could discredit a person, Bill, without killing them.
Right.
And I'm going to leave you with this. William Harvey is a very suspicious character. He was in charge of, originally he was Staff D, which is foreign intelligence at the CIA, but he ran the ZR rifle assassination program for the CIA. Okay. And he says he basically came up with the blueprint of the assassinations. And he says, what you do is you have a phony 201 file or a manipulated 201 file, and you always blame the assassination on one of your other enemies, which is exactly what's happened. And he also said that, it's not it doesn't have to be the perfect crime, as long as you can control the investigation. If you could control the investigation, the evidence really doesn't matter. You know what I'm saying? Because you're controlling it.
Right.
So I just think there was ways they could have had Oswald discredited. But again, if you look at the other patsies in the assassinations after Kennedy, they didn't have the strongest affiliations to the intelligence community like Oswald did.
Right.
So maybe they learned their lesson. We can't use a guy like this again.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Better to use a guy like Sirhan or.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And the thing is, there's just to me, when I look at it, Oswald is he's so perfect for blaming the communists, blaming the Cubans and the Russians on this, but Johnson went the other direction. Johnson panicked. He didn't want a war with the Soviet Union.
Right.
So he went with the lone gunman theory, because I think, Bill, if Johnson did go that direction, now this is totally speculation on my part. If Johnson did go that direction, okay, I think the more stuff would have came out. Like, I think there's always a contingency plan, Bill.
Yeah.
There's always some more stuff would have came out about Oswald. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was so easy because the public wanted an answer. They wanted, it's just easier to blame it on one person.
It's always
easier
is.
to understand that. It keeps the trust in the government. It was just it was wrapped up, nice and tidy, and it ended with Jack Ruby walking up to this guy and shooting him.
Well, sure. If you just listen to the media and you just read a summary of the Warren Commission, you don't read the 26 volumes of how you get to that,
Right.
everything is nicely wrapped up.
Yeah.
But when you read the 26 volumes, you understand, this doesn't match. That doesn't match. Why didn't they investigate this? And then you understand that, the case against Oswald never would have lasted in court, or never would have stood up in court.
And the fact that you have to do that, you have to essentially become a historian and a researcher just to find out that this guy didn't actually kill
Well, that's
the
a great
president.
question, but why does Jim DiEugenio and Lisa Pease and all these other authors that I mentioned, why do they have to do the work that the government should have done years ago?
Right. They should be telling us
Exactly.
this is what really happened, and they won't. They don't. And they never will.
No, I don't think they'll ever admit it, Bill.
No. Sean, this has been an amazing episode. This has gone on. This is one of our longer episodes. Amazing stuff, just incredible. Listening to this information and being able to ask, I'm sure, the questions that a lot of our listeners have had and will have. And if you guys have more questions, things that I didn't think about, things that you're screaming right now at your phone or whatever you're listening on, please send us an email. It's that'senoughoutoyou@gmail.com. It's all one word. that'senoughoutoyou@gmail.com. Sean has done a lot of reading, a lot of research, and if you come up with a question that he doesn't know the answer to, he'll try to find it.
And again, Bill, when I speculate, I'm open to criticism. When I'm reading from the document, that's something that's a fact. But when I'm speculating, and I say I'm speculating, and somebody comes up and they give me another theory or something, I'm open to it. You know what I mean?
Right.
I'll admit I was wrong.
And and you can disagree with what Sean is saying. What you're essentially saying, Sean, you're reading from these documents. So
right.
If you disagree with if they disagree with what you're saying, it's just a question of, here's where to find that information. If you want to go read it yourself,
And then, if you disagree, you could explain, well, why did this lone gunman have files going back to 4 or 5 years before he assassinated Kennedy?
Right.
Why was there thousands of documents on him from various agencies, and none of them are still not released? All of them have not been released.
Yeah. Well, we have to wrap up. We have to wrap up this episode, but
all right, buddy.
We will continue. We'll have more of this stuff again this entire month. We've got our series of episodes on JFK, on the assassination. So we'll keep going with this. Sean, thank you. This has been fantastic. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. We're all over social media. We are on every single podcast outlet. You can find it. And if we're not on the one that you listen to, send me an email, let us know, and we'll get on that one too.
And we welcome all feedback, buddy.
We welcome it. We can't wait to hear your feedback. Thank you, Sean.
All right, buddy.
All right. Thanks, everybody. And hey, that's enough out of you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Hey listeners, exciting news. A special episode of That's Enough Out of You is coming up on Tuesday, November 22nd. Sean and I welcome author Lisa Pease to the podcast. Lisa is the author of A Lie Too Big to Fail, the real history of the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy, and co-editor of the book Assassinations, which covers the deaths of JFK, Martin Luther King, RFK, and Malcolm X. She's a speaker, activist, and truth teller, and we're thrilled to have her on. Our episodes normally drop on Fridays, but this one is coming a few days early to honor the anniversary of the JFK assassination. So don't forget to check your podcast feed, YouTube, or however you listen to our show. But make sure you listen, because this is going to be an amazing episode. Thanks for your support.